Great. So welcome everyone.
Good morning.
So the organic farm team, I'm a part of that through the Transition Toolkit program, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And then Todd, I'll let you kind of take it away and talk about the organic farm team and your role in that as well.
Yeah, like you said before, I'm the owner of Dakota's Best Seed and DenBesten brand seed corn. We've been working at putting this team together for a while, um, seeing that there was a need for a lot of different things in the organic space that really either weren't being provided or were really hard to find people that you could get advice from and assistance in your program or in your on your farm. That's really what we've been doing, assembling a team of talented individuals. I believe brings me back to, and I think I quoted this last time I was on here, but a friend of mine out of Texas, he did an interview for Seed World magazine years ago, and they asked him at the end of the interview, they said, "What's the smartest thing you ever did in your business?" And he said, "The smartest thing I ever did was hire people that were more talented and smarter than I was and let them do their job." So, with that being said, I believe I've done that, or we're doing that and continuing to add pieces along the way. So, I'm pretty excited about what we've been able to put together. So, yeah, I said I'm the owner of the seed company. I've been living in Platte, South Dakota my whole life, born and raised here. Small town, um, good place to live, good place to raise a family. I've been farming on the side or on my own outside the business here since 2000. Um, a few years back now, I decided it was time to, since we were offering organic seed products and our facility was certified organic to clean and process grains and seeds, it'd be a good idea for me to start transitioning some of my ground to organic as well. Um, so yeah, and it says there I've been in the family seed business all my life, and this is kind of all I know. I don't know what else I would do. This is all I've ever done. So um, kind of in my blood, I guess. So yeah, like I said, we started on the farm back in 2000, um, raising some seed grain, spring wheat at the time, uh, seed that we could sell through the company. Worked out okay, but my goal was to get it to wheatgrass that fall and raise intermediate wheatgrass that we could have to sell out of here as well. Um, Now we've taken the existing farm we had. We farmed that for a long time, and this last fall of 2019, we um, we were offered another 800-acre farm from a gentleman that was interested in seeing it transition to organic production. And that field or that farm in particular was 100% prevented plant in 2019. And we were offered that in July, looked at it as a good opportunity to maybe begin a transition on that farm. Um, and we'll talk about how that all went here later on. But we do run a small herd of Scottish Highland cattle that we use on a field or two to clean up the rough hay and so on left behind the combine, giving them that grazing opportunity all fall. Works out pretty nice. We don't have a lot of them, but and only, like I said, one or two fields that it works on. But you can sure see the difference in the fields that can be utilized with livestock the following year. Seems to make quite a difference. Navigating equipment needs. Those are some of the tools that we have that we utilize in our operation. You see at the bottom there, comb cutter, flame weeder would be things that from last week's Fridays on the farm. We didn't talk about the comb cutter, but the flame weeder certainly um, rekindled my, no pun intended, rekindled my interest in the flame weeder and how that could work in our perennial grasses and things, which we'll talk about later too. The struggles with weed control that we had with that.
Todd, can you kind of talk more about the Turbo Till, like what brand and what it really does for you for folks that might have not used one before?
Turbo till that Great Plains makes that. We have a 15-footer. Does a really nice job seed bed preparation. Does a vertical tillage tool that doesn't turn over ground. It just cuts vertically and sizes up your residue and really leaves you a nice seed bed.
Sure.
We run that a lot.
We'll get right into
Yeah,
the challenges here.
yeah, well, not unlike anybody else, weed control and fertility are your top two issues that you deal with outside of things you can't control, and that's your weather and so on. But talk a little bit about the challenges that I had with that new farm we took on that I'd mentioned before. It was 800 acres and it was all prevent plant. So I thought, like it says, it sounded simple, sounded like a slam dunk setup where I could get it cleaned up that fall and get it planted to grass seed in the fall of 2019. So we made the deal in July thinking, it's got to quit raining. Well, yeah, that didn't happen. So we were slamming right at the last bitter moments to try to get through those fields that hadn't been touched all year and were solid weeds, to get a disc through them, going around all the water holes and the low spots and just trying to desperately get something done, as I had it in my head that was what I wanted to do, and that was just, we were going to push that and make it happen. So we ended up not getting that seed planted until probably, I think it was about the 10th of October, which was about a month late. And therein set us on a pathway to trouble coming next spring, the following spring. And we can talk about that later. It says, and I guess the one field that says here, one field needed sprayed. Yes, we did have to go in on 2/4 of it actually, that our stand of grass did not come, and we were forced to burn it down and start over on that piece. Thankfully, we weren't 2 years into it. We were just getting started. So we had to go in, clean it up, and that field ended up getting put to barley last spring of 20.
Todd, I had a comment here. Folks are having a little bit of trouble hearing you, so maybe scoot closer to your computer if you can.
I'll try that. Is that better? I was getting reclined in my chair, getting relaxed. So.
Got to get your projection on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we all need, is that, right? Fertility is an issue, everybody in this space deals with. We have out here, we have no access to manure. So we're, basically what we're doing is fish fertilizer and biologicals, some Chilean nitrate, and some other things that Drew, the fertility guru that I work with puts together for us. And say the green manure is important. I think that we've probably last year we were forced to take a lot of that off of the field after the grass seed harvest that we did have because of the weed problems that we had in there, and we wanted to just remove a lot of that from the field, and we ended up doing that. But we go back to that later, I think, too. So
Talk about maybe why Chilean nitrate? Why do you think that makes sense for your situation maybe?
honest answer, it's easy. It's easy, and you get a pretty good bang with on the nitrogen side for what you're putting on. With the grass production that we have, the nitrogen is a much needed piece to the puzzle, and we just struggle with being able to get enough on um, with just the fish and some of that. We need more than that to get it to produce like we need to.
Well, and the timeliness of when you need it, is really key.
Right. Well, and yeah, and even this year in 20, um, quite honestly, there was a lot of acres that didn't even get hit with anything because of the rainfall that we had here. We couldn't get in there. Um, didn't want to tear the fields up any worse than they were. They were a little rough from the last fall anyway. So there's some of the acres didn't get anything. They were left to fend for themselves.
Sure.
Make it or break it.
Well, before we leave the topic of the Chilean nitrate, for folks that are newer to organic, it's allowed for use in the USDA National Organic Program, but if you want to sell product to Canadian markets, or if you're certified to be able to sell, you aren't allowed to use it. So it can get a little complex there depending on your situation, just so folks understand that.
Right. And that's not the only thing obviously that's out there. There are other tools you can put in your toolbox that can work for you as well. But yeah, labor availability. We have two guys that pretty much are full-time farm duty. Um, that particular farm, which is the bulk of our acres, is about 17 miles from our home base here. So that in itself is challenging. Just the movement of equipment and personnel back and forth and timeliness of everything um, is a challenge. And everyone knows many times in the year you wish you had twice the help that you do, but I guess you make work with what you have available. So and that does impact the crops that I intend on producing there. A lot of what we're doing are perennial crops, wheat grasses, red clover, alfalfa, and then of course with a small grain in between those, the termination of those perennial crops. I think your workload, you're crunched for a season while you're planting things, but then once you get that stand established, your workload dramatically goes down. That's one of the reasons why we go that direction. And those crops that we're raising for seed stock for our use here and our sales through Dakota's Best. So they kind of work hand in glove. Some of the things that we planted this last year, um, well, I shouldn't say that. There's some, when we started transition in 2017 on our first pieces, then uh, we went to meadow brome grass and tall wheat grass on the fields that we were working on back then, um, to begin that transition period. In those established fields where that grass had been in a couple years, actually was pretty easy in a lot of ways. The establishment year and the weed pressure was out of the way, so we didn't have to fight that too bad. And I guess maybe that experience right out of the gate gave me the nerve to try that 800-acre piece, which 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 was a learning curve to say the least, through it all. But yeah, we raised this year. We had some beta gene oats, which is a Wisconsin variety. Um, red clover is coming into the rotation. Um, we've got some improved varieties of red clover that we're going to be producing organically, and some conventionally starting out for seed production. Alfalfa is always in the mix, like most people. The brome I mentioned, we did last year. We had a quarter section of white milo on some transitional ground that actually did quite well. Um, Very little, if any, fertility. A couple times we squeezed through um, with the cultivator late, fighting the rains and whatnot. So it actually did pretty well. Yeah, all things considered, we did raise a field of certified bull spring wheat, which is a Minnesota variety that did really well. There again, all the same challenges. And we had a field of Rasmussen barley, certified Rasmussen barley for seed production as well. That was on that field that we ended up having to burn down with spraying it after we lost control of yeah, thistle, water hemp, whatnot was rolling pretty good. So the barley is what we ended up putting in there. We do have a field of buck naked barley, which is a hull-less barley, or yeah, a hull-less barley that comes out of Oregon, which is kind of a neat concept. It's a winter barley. We have that planted now, so we'll see how this cold weather treats it in the next week here. But and then another thing, we did plant the grass we planted on that farm this past year was Kernza, and some of you have probably heard of that. And University of Minnesota, they've got some varieties of Kernza that they work with, and tied in with the Land Institute, um, as Minnesota had gotten their varieties from them to begin working with. But we ended up being contacted by the Land Institute to see if we could help them in some production with some production issues they were having, trying to get enough seed stock out there consistently. And intermediate wheatgrass is what Kernza is. My family's been in that for 50 years. So we kind of had a little idea of what it took to grow that stuff. And that's what we had planted on those, the late planted, uh, fall planted Kernza in 2019, and the challenges that brought us last year, like I talked about with the weed problems and whatnot.
I think we could probably do a whole webinar just on Kernza with all the backstory and development
Right,
here.
right. So it kind of brings us to this, and how I probably, no fault of anyone but myself, start expecting miracles and expecting too much off your farm, out of your soil. Um, Looking back on that 2019 um, project that we took on, the best course of action there would have been to get that fall planting out of my head, get the ground in as good a shape as I could, and shoot for the following spring to go with maybe a small grain, oats, barley, what have you, and getting that, if grass was my goal to get planted in there, to get that in shape good to be able to plant grass fall of 2020. But I thought we could do it, and I was expecting a miracle there, and um, expecting too much out of what I was being dealt there. I should have pulled back and reevaluated the position and made a different choice. But I guess, like they always say, there's no school that's free, right? You, the only challenge is when you're ready, when it's time to graduate, that you don't fail and you have to retake the course. So hopefully I'll remember the challenges that I had there, and put that in the memory vault, and maybe do a different, make a different choice next time.
But I think the transition period is the time to learn some of these lessons too,
Right.
A little bit less riding on it than if it was already certified and, you really needed that income. Not that you don't need the income during the transition years too, but it really is the time to have a learning experience.
Right. Well, with that, being able to do that, realizing you're learning a new system here, but your challenges there is to manage your risk. You want to be able to do this with the least amount of risk and financial and mental mental anguish as possible, and doing that a piece at a time rather than the whole farm. If I would have taken on an 80 in that farm and started that transition there, um, maybe trying a few things like the grass, where if I'd have went to alfalfa, let's say, on the majority of it, and allowed that alfalfa to build that soil and to allow my cutting and mowing and baling to give me that weed suppression over a couple of years, I would have ultimately been a lot further ahead.
Well, and we talked about equipment a little bit earlier. I mean, how much would you really make a different decision? I know you talk a lot about alfalfa being kind of that bedrock safe space during transition to control weeds and, add some fertility. Do you think if you had more tools in your toolbox, so to speak, out front, that you'd make a different decision, or do you still feel like that grass alfalfa as a way to suppress weeds is kind of the best for you?
I think that it's a very viable way to go. Um, I don't have my own baler. Actually, one of the farm manager actually has baling and haying equipment that I utilize. But even doing that, that's an expensive proposition as well. Hiring custom haying is not cheap. And I've got a small herd of cattle, but I can't utilize all that product myself. So you're constantly looking for buyers of the alfalfa or the grass alfalfa hay or whatever you've got, and oftentimes you end up bringing it to auction and taking what you get. Uh, so there's challenges with that too. But I guess trying to, maybe if you're not set up to get into haying alfalfa or grass, maybe getting a relationship with somebody that does have the cattle that could utilize that, maybe working out a deal where they can put it up on shares for you, handle all that, kind of take some of the workload off yourself, and the need to go, buy extra equipment to be putting up hay. So there's every situation is different with what's going to work for an individual. So yeah, you talk where you're still removing the fertility, like you've got noted there. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I'm kind of rethinking as well. Um, you like to clean those fields off, especially on the grasses that I'm talking about. Remove that hay after you combine your seed off is important. But what we've done in the past is bale all that rough hay, and so you've got really glorified straw behind the combine. Might be worth a little more than straw on the right year, but that's about it. I'm wondering if I'm going to be much further ahead by um, going through there instead of with a windrower and baler, is to go through there with a flail mower or a stalk chopper and just return all that green manure back onto the ground. I would bet that, sometimes it's hard to look away from the few bucks you're getting off of that rough hay, but in the long haul, I think you're going to be much further ahead by putting that back onto the soil and utilizing that green manure in a much better way.
As long as your weed control plan isn't just cutting and baling and there's not a bunch of weed seeds in that, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Well, and that's why we took all that kernza hay off after we combined, and yeah, it was worthless. It was full of weeds, and we had windrowed everything, and we picked up all the windrows and dropped it, so it was dry as a cork, and really useless for any feed. But I wanted to make sure we could remove the weed seeds that were still there, getting them off of that field, hopefully to help that for this next year now, somewhat.
Sure.
And yeah, when we combined, we took all the weeds to town with that too. We we made sure and loaded up the truck with good and bad.
Do you think in your area, are there other beef operations that would trade, manure for straw, or is everyone typically pretty protective over the manure that they have, and that probably wouldn't be just had a comment here, that's a strategy
Right.
to use with some of that rough hay and straw. But
Yeah.
in that area, people are pretty protective over their manure that they do have.
Yeah. There's not, maybe contrary to what people think, you get out in the western west central South Dakota, you think there's a lot of cattle. Well, that's not nearly what it used to be. And we don't have any feedlots here that seem to have excess manure. So it's really something difficult to come by. But one thing we are contemplating is using some of that rough hay into starting to make a green compost with that to maybe better utilize that material. So we'll see how that goes, but that could be a nice utilization of um, that product as well.
Well, then you don't necessarily have that concern over weed seeds.
Correct. Actually, the more weeds in there, the better for quality of compost. So yeah, we've got that, and that part of it we've got. So yeah, in the primary crops that we're intending on working with, the perennials, alfalfas, clovers, grasses, You know, obviously between your rotations, your small grain is gonna come into play there. As in about any rotation, the small grain needs to be a part of what you're doing. Um, Weed suppression, many different reasons why you need small grain in there. Um, Oats alone in the spring. Yeah, I see quite a few people like seeding alfalfa, let's say, um, doing a spring seeding. A lot of people put oats in there as a nurse crop. Um, I guess it depends what your goal is there, but from what I've seen, it's I've had better luck planting oats alone, oats or barley in the spring, or even spring wheat, taking a full crop of grain off and getting that land set up to do an August seeding of alfalfa after the small grain is gone. I seem to get much better establishment on the alfalfa. You get past your weed competition that you always have in the spring seeding. Um, you plant it in August and you're set up for a full scale production of alfalfa that next year, and still able to get a good crop of small grain off in the first place. Seems to work pretty well. May, are you still there? Looks like we lost May. Maybe.
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
Did I get this picture right? This is interseeding alfalfa, correct?
Yeah, that's in that particular field. That was a piece that we planted to western wheatgrass with intentions on doing seed production on, and our stand establishment was really not good. And the following year, then we went and interseeded alfalfa. That was pretty early in the spring. Um, Went through it with the lightly disked it, got rid of the cheatgrass problem we had there. Or I shouldn't say that. It seems like you never get rid of it, but knocked the cheatgrass back, interseeded the alfalfa, and then we ended up actually getting a couple of decent cuttings of nice hay in 2020 on that. That field's been in transition now. This will be its, I think, coming third year now. So I'm not sure what we'll end up doing with that one after 21 here, but um, it should be set up pretty nicely for something else. Um, Maybe probably a small grain in next year or something.
Well, and you've used a lot of different varieties of alfalfa over the years, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever found more or less fertility benefit from any of those varieties? Maybe that's a silly question, but I've kind of been curious if some of the varieties that maybe have more of a diverse, like branched root versus a tap root have
Yeah.
any impact on fertility or till at all.
Yeah. There's a lot of differences in alfalfas in their root development and the root styles and so on. I can't say that I've seen it or I've paid any attention to, which is better or worse building of fertility. Um, in the field, I know there's a lot of clovers that are certainly different in the amount of nitrogen they produce in a life cycle and how quickly that happens.
Well, interesting comment here from Jack that um, fertility from alfalfa may be dependent on how much of it you allow to bloom.
Okay.
So that would just depend on your number of cuttings and, you know, your sort of management objectives there too.
Right, right. Well, I do have intentions at some point, and I haven't gotten it set up right yet, but I do have intentions of trying to do some alfalfa seed production. Maybe 2021 now is gonna be a good year for that. That seems to need hot and dry. And that seems to be the way it's gonna set up this year, so we'll see. Um, I am gonna do that with that red clover. My intentions are to do that with that red clover. That could be interesting. Being able to let that maybe mow your first cutting off with a flail mower, come back. Your second cutting you'd take for seed, and then there again you'd return all that green manure back onto the ground. I I believe that that's going to probably be a pretty nice setup. Yeah, there was our transitional first year transition spring wheat. There again, very little. We got across it once with some fish and not enough of it. That's all it got. And I think we ended up doing about a 50 bushel spring wheat crop, certified bowls, nice quality. Was very blessed with how that turned out.
When did you do the fish product?
Too late. By the time it quit raining, it was too late. We made one pass through there and pulled the plug and said it's gonna get it. It is what it is, and that's all it's gonna get. So uh, I was very blessed with how that turned out. We're cleaning that actually here probably next week, getting that seed cleaned up and certified for sale.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that variety too, even over into Wisconsin.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, that's a Minnesota variety that it's very high protein wheat. Um, Fits a lot of the baking demands, flour demands. I think that's going to be something that fits some programs.
Is it really a pretty new variety? How long has it been around?
Oh, it's been. Let me look.
I've just been seeing it the last couple of years, I feel like.
Yeah. Let me look in my book.
And it's essentially a hard red spring type.
Hard red spring wheat, yeah.
Yeah.
2015 it came out.
Okay.
So it's been out for a little while.
Got some Kernza establishment pictures up here.
Yeah. That was a few weeks, probably three weeks or so after planting there on the left. Um, pretty inadequate establishment there. On the other side, the bottom right, that's a couple weeks later. No, hold on. That was the following spring. I believe that was the following spring.
Okay.
And we'd been through that. As you can see, we've done some tine weeding and a rotary hoe through that field. And that's really what kind of put me in the hole as far as my weed control, but my weed problems, to say that I pushed that planting time far too late. So we didn't have that seed, that plant was not established. It was it wasn't big enough the following spring. It was just a little hair. It hadn't stooled at all. So we had to, in my mind, we had to wait longer than we should have to be able to get through that the first time. I was afraid the stand was poor enough. I didn't want to tear out any more than what we were going to do already. And that set us back. So there again, hindsight, I should have never planted it last spring of 2019. I should have waited and done something else. But there again, I put myself behind the 8 ball by expecting a miracle there. And when I thought about it over the winter, I realized that that was a mistake really, and I shouldn't have tried that. But we did. We did make it through it. We did, by the grace of God, get a decent harvest of grass seed off of there, and learned a good lesson.
Does this variety of Kernza it still just focuses on rooting down? It doesn't have like a stoloniferous, like branchy roots on the soil surface. Like it doesn't form a real mat, right?
It will over time. It'll start to actually get too thick and too sod bound, and it gets pretty thatchy. Which is why you want to remove a lot of that straw after you take your seed off. Remove it, chop it up, and put it back on the ground. You'd be okay. But if that plant's just allowed to lay down on the soil surface over the winter, you're going to have an interesting time getting that started the following spring.
Sure. Do you foresee leaving these stands in for more than 5 years? We had a comment here about Kernza performance at that year 5 to 7. I mean, as far as seed production, are you really getting as good a quality seed at that phase? I'm not sure.
Yeah, your quality doesn't diminish, but your volume certainly will. And that's the reason, like that happens is what I just alluded to, and that's that it gets sod bound, it gets too thick, and your head size goes from being 10 inches long down to 5 inches. Yeah, you've got a lot more heads there, but they're not producing near what they should be. So what I've done, not only on Kernza but on wheatgrasses in general over the years, is on conventional acres, after 3 years I would go through that with the disc pretty aggressively and knock out a bunch of that those plants, thin it out again, kind of revitalizes it and starts it over. A turbo till could be a good one for that too. You do that in the fall after your harvest. You get a lot of your weeds that are coming in the fall. You clean those up. Your cheatgrass, you clean that up. You can get quite aggressive. You'll swear that you just killed your whole stand, but you kind of just have to close your eyes and go because it works. Lighter duty would be to come through with a harrow and harrow the soup out of it, knock out some small weed seeds that way too. You really don't thin your stand with that. You have to get in there with a disc to get that done, but that does work quite well.
Sure.
And how long do you leave it? It's the economics. If it's not profitable anymore, it's not yielding, you need to back up and take a run at it and start over with something else.
I found this picture. I'm not sure what stage in development that seed head is at. That's not ready for harvest, or is it?
No, you're not long after pollination there. So you're probably 25 days from harvest there.
Sure.
Typically, Our harvest is usually on that stuff is end of July.
We have about 10 minutes left. So Todd, I'll let you kind of make some of your final comments here. And if we have time, I have some slides to share. Otherwise, folks, please find that chat box. I know there's some folks on the call here that either work with growers in transition or are organic or new to organic. So keep your questions or comments coming.
Yeah, I guess I just to kind of end here, just some crops that I've been thinking about, bringing into in between my perennial rotations, and some things that I think might be overlooked in the organic space, and the food grade Milo, the white Milo. There's some pretty good interest beginning to happen in that. There always has been some, but I think that's probably a underrated, overlooked commodity. Um, it'll take lower fertility than trying to raise corn. Lower costs across the board. Very drought tolerant crop that can make a good crop on very little rainfall. So pretty interesting. And I had that white Milo last year. Like I said, that did quite well, given what it was put through. And yeah, interesting. Millet is another one, proso millet that I've been hearing some rumblings about. How people are starting to really look hard at millet, proso millet, in the ingredient markets more so than ever. I heard a comment the other day that they think millet could take over the quinoa space. Um, Cheaper to produce, um, maybe better for you. So it's interesting. And rye is another. Winter rye is another one that seems to be gaining speed in the organic um, space and for food, and also the distillery markets that are out there. It seems like there's never enough organic rye grain around in the fall. Um, there again, it's got some moderate input needs. Super on weed suppression for whatever crop you're going to follow it with. It's a fall planted. September is best. Kind of split your workload up for spring planting and be able to harvest middle summer. So it's worth looking at that one as well. The only thing that's hard for me with that is in my situation with those perennial grasses, especially, is that rye is kind of a weed. It doesn't really go away, and I can't have that in my grass seed production because I can't clean that out of that grass seed. It doesn't work. So I personally need to stay. If I'm going to do grasses, I need to stay away from the winter rye setup. It just wrecks what I'm trying to do. So, but for the right farm, that's a great idea.
Had a fun question come in here. Are you hearing any sort of ingredient buyers out there talking about peas, beans, or other crops for some of these alternative, or I like your vegetable meat, he calls it vegetable meat markets. I know you're not really raising anything in terms of peas or beans, but I know, in the region out there, there's some growers having success with that. Do you keep tabs on what folks are asking for in that market?
Yeah, that's a market that's hot as fire, all over the place. We haven't really gotten into that side of it. I don't know that we will. It seems like there's a lot of bigs that are in that have kind of dominated that market with proprietary varieties and kind of like the colored corn. and where you get, you plant their varieties and they contract to buy back. Yeah, it's lucrative. Right now it's hot. It's got super potential.
Yeah, I think like you said, there are really, just a handful of companies, at least in this region, that are kind of dominating some of the, not only the genetics there, but there's only so many people willing to do the processing that it takes
Right,
for those products. So
right,
yeah, and good point, Jack. He says it helps make a longer rotation. Um,
right,
maybe if you didn't have that seed focus, or that wasn't as easy of a market for you, it would make more sense.
right. Correct.
We'll talk about this fun winter rye idea that we discussed yesterday, and then we'll start wrapping up here.
Yeah, that's an experiment that's going to be started next spring. At least an experiment for us. Maybe someone's tried this, and maybe probably they have. We've got some growers that are going to plant winter rye in the early spring, um, to where the late enough to where that rye can come up, but not go through a dormancy phase. So we get that rye to come up, give us that early cover, and um, begin that allelopathic effect on weed suppression. And when you plant that rye in the spring, winter rye in the spring, it won't go into grain production. It'll remain foliar, and that plant will get up about a foot and a half and then pretty much be done and stop. So I was just talking with a grower this winter. He was getting some corn from us, and we started talking about that concept because I've seen it done by on accident, actually planting that rye, and they thought they were planting spring triticale it was, and it ended up being winter triticale, and that's exactly what happened. It got up about a foot and a half tall and it just quit. So I said, what if we did that on purpose with rye early spring, so it didn't go through dormancy? What would you have for opportunities there? So he's going to try it. He's going to go through with a cultivator, I guess, is what he's going to do, and clean out his row, and then plant his corn um, right into that row, into that rye. So we'll see how that works. That could be
So
interesting.
they'll still be, essentially, the rye will serve as a little bit of a mulch there
Correct.
for some weed suppression. So it's almost like you're using nature as your roller crimper in this scenario.
Right. Right. So
Yeah.
you may end up getting the effect that you want without having to go in and plant so late. Number one, you'll be able to plant earlier because you don't have to worry about crimping that rye. But we'll see if the theory plays out.
Yeah, we'll have to do some more webinars on that one. I'll need to try to get out in
Yeah,
the field and take some pictures.
yeah, that'll be interesting. The grower was he thinks it's a slam dunk. He's going to do it on all of his corn acres this spring. So I'm praying it's going to work. Yeah.
Well, we'll start to wrap up here today. I had some slides prepared, but Todd had enough fun stories to share. We didn't need to let me take over at all today, but here's my contact information, questions about today, questions about what we do, our webinars. I wanted to throw out there, next week's session, we're going to talk about tillage reduction. I don't think we're so brave as to say we're going to talk about no-till and organic systems. I think there are folks out there that are achieving that, but it's something to work towards, and we're going to talk about some of the research and the conversations going on out there with reducing tillage and organic systems. I'll have a colleague of mine, Doug Voss from the Sustainable Farm Association in Minnesota, talking about some of his experience in the field as well. You can find all of our sessions from Fridays on the Farm on YouTube. Just look for Organic Farm Team. Same thing on Facebook. Just find us there, Organic Farm Team. I wanted to throw a plug in here as well for our Organic Farm Team Summit coming up in just a couple weeks here. Check out our website, organicfarmteam.com. We have a packed agenda. We have some really fun panels, speakers from all over. Some of them will be there in person. Some of them will be coming in virtually as well. Some really fun exhibitors additionally. So give me a call, check out our website if you have questions about the summit coming up here.
I would say, encourage people, get registered for that. There is starting to get to be a lot of registrations, and it should be a real good time. I rented the bowling alley next door to the convention center, so we'll be able to have some fun bowling afterwards on Friday night. So it could be kind of fun.
What I'd be remiss today if I didn't mention, part of our Organic Farm Team is this service component, the Transition Toolkit Service Program. It's really just a way for us to customize whatever folks might need in terms of support during the transition process, whether it's just figuring out and navigating the certification and record keeping side, all the way to some of these agronomy considerations as well. So thanks everyone so much for joining us today, and we will see you next Friday.
Have a good week.
Bye all.